This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new value, and a new experience.
Welcome to the G-Spot Podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us for conversations around sex, spirit, and all things self-care. All things self-care. All things self-care.
This is a journey into sound.
Uno, dos, tres, cuatro.
You are a G-Spot Podcast with Katie Silcox.
Hi G-Spot listeners, this is Amaury, Program Director at Shakti School. This week's episode is a snippet from our year-long Ayurveda certification program. Our next intake is in January, so if you want to do a deep dive into Ayurveda over a year with us and also learn how to help other people with Ayurveda, head to theshaktischool.com and click on Ayurveda at the top. There you can download the syllabus and sign up for our free 4-hour mini course with Katie. I'm wishing you so much peace, coziness, and clarity this fall. Enjoy the episode.
I'm going to repeat that. In our own individual experience, it can very much feel like we're going through this time by ourselves. And that's exacerbated by the reality of many of us actually being alone or more alone than we normally would be. And it's also this incredible time when we are being asked to take pause. And when we are asked to take pause, one of two things will happen. Or you might oscillate between the two options. One is you will be forced to look at yourself and to look at your patterns and to look at your tendencies. And when, there's a reason why studies show that people would rather die than sit in a room alone in quiet, right? There's very real evidence around this that most people are terrified of sitting in a room alone quiet. And I was thinking, many of them must not be meditators. My point is, we're being forced to really interface with the content because the distractions are less, just socially speaking. And number two, the second option is that we devolve into our addictions and afflictions. And you may go back and forth, right? But hopefully we in this community of Shakti School can really use this moment and this time and this place and this people to catapult our spiritual practice. There is just personally for me so much rising to the surface, asking to be loved on. I can't even believe it. And I feel myself becoming more myself. And it's incredibly uncomfortable. And so I'm just throwing that out there. Sometimes when I speak, it seems that there's tears and smiles and head nods. And it seems there could be some resonance with this greater collective that, shit's tough right now on every single level. As my beloved mentor and teacher says, you are being asked to eat the shit sandwich. And that may seem like not a fun thing, but manure is that which gives nutrition to the soil, which is vastly depleted, and one of the reasons why things like coronavirus take over. So, pause button in Shakti School Level 1 to hold space for the incredible bravery of a community that holds as a tenet that we are going to walk into ourselves and be with ourselves and hold ourselves. This is the basics of Ayurvedic medicine. You become the witness to the shit sandwich. And, as Dr. Ladd, my sweet, sweet grandfather, says, the mango juice that is juiced when the mango is ripe. And how do you know that the mango is ripe? Because it is your emotional body and you start to cry, right? Or you start to get angry. The emotions of fear start to rise to the surface, and that means the mango is ripe. And if we stay with it, we get the juice, the juiciness, which is the rasa, right? The sap of life. It's the thing that makes you like somebody else, right? When you get to see that juiciness and realness. So on that note, with so much love, I sit here with and before you guys and just say that these Ayurveda Wednesdays and I do Ayurveda Tuesdays with our level 2 ladies, it's just like taken on a completely new meaning for me in quarantine, this being one of the major ways that I get to be with all of you incredibly high vibration humans. It is my heart's longing that very soon we all can come together in person and hold one another tight and laugh and really be in the juiciness of what we've gone through together. And I think that will happen on a collective. A last thing I want to say before moving on to the specifics of this moment in time and this place and these people is to remember the central tenets of all of our lineages, and that is we are dreaming the dream together, and we get to call in and we get to dream up what we want tomorrow to be about. And so I think now more than ever it's truly vital that we remain hopeful and that we envision what we want life to look like when we're on the other side of these things, and to support one another in that dream. Really important that you have people around you that can hold the possibility of two things being true at the same time. And this is an incredibly challenging time, and also a time for great connectivity. On that note, here we find ourselves in one of my favorite parts of Ayurveda School, which is the introduction to Ayurvedic pharmacology. And I just got sprayed by the vibhuti, the holy ash of my fire pit, so it must be a good sign. The computer screen is doused in holy ash. So Ayurvedic pharmacology, and also transitioning into fall. So here we are on that precipice, and the teachings call these particular transitional moments Sutika. And I'm going to write that out for you guys. It's Sutika. Sutika is used especially during death. When someone dies, it's said to be a transition portal. And the dying, the person who has died obviously is in a transition, but also the people that have been left behind are in a transition. If you've lost someone, you understand this. I had a dear friend who also was a member of Shakti School several years ago, and she speaks very openly about this, so I don't feel that I'm violating any trust here. It's interesting, I'm speaking about this because it was around this time, if I'm not mistaken. She lost her daughter, freshman in college, in a very violent, brutal way, a murder. And when I spoke to her, and I read the letters she wrote me, and I wrote her, she was somewhere else. And she was a longtime yogini, and I got the blessing of being able to be in the presence of someone who had just lost their child and who was operating from a different plane of awareness. And in that plane of awareness, she was actually counseling me, and she was actually counseling our community, and she was actually telling everyone, no, do not for 1 second feel that I am not in 100% communication with my daughter. She is on the other side. She wants us to know that she is fine and that we need to continue to walk in love, and on and on and on. This woman was just like preaching, and all of us were actually getting a blessing from her. And she was in Sutika. Sutika is that place where the veil between this life and the next is thin. This life and what lies beyond this experience of being embodied together on the planet, which, by the way, in and of itself makes us all brothers and sisters. Like, all of us are embodied in this time. We all share the collective karma of this time. Now, that Sutika period maybe is around 40 days. And that's traditionally when all religious spiritual traditions would have the mourning period and the mourning rituals, mourning, death rituals. And so there's a wisdom here to that transitional period. And then, of course, it may hit you, the deep grief. And I'm not saying this was that person's experience. I can't speak to her experience. But I can speak to the fact that there tends to be a clarity at the hour of death and around that time. And then the deeper grief and the coming to terms with the loss happens 40 days, more or less, right? Later on, it starts to hit you, and that's when actually people need more support from their community. So all this to say, you and I, here and now, are sitting in the Sutika period of the year. This time, particularly the fall solstice, and this time until basically the end of November is a really powerful portal time when the veil between this life and the next is the thinnest. There is a very real reason why Halloween and All Hallows Eve and Day of the Dead fall around these times, where you would communicate with your ancestors. Because the veil between this life and the next, or it's a way of saying something that is actually non-linear. The veil between the embodied reality and the continuum of all things continue to exist at all times is the thinnest. So, some of you may love this season. In Sutika, in this period of transition, it is also the time when, I tell that story of my friend's great loss and her great strength because it's been a really huge, it's like a memory for me of really understanding the power in loss and death and transition, the strength, that potentiality. And this time is also the time when we're the most vulnerable to sickness, disease, etc. And now I'm speaking, of course, in terms of our hemisphere, where I am in the Western Hemisphere. If you are in the South, Australia, New Zealand, we have a lot of gals from that part of the world. This is, of course, the opposite for you guys. And so maybe if you're in Australia and New Zealand, you can tell me when your fall is, because I'm not really sure. So the Ayurvedic texts speak of this time as the portal through which death occurs. And really that can be anything. So it is the reason why we cleanse our body during this time, because Mother Nature is naturally doing that. The leaves are getting brown. They're drying out. Everything is getting smaller and drier and letting go to death. So it's this really great time for cleansing. We also cleanse as a way of keeping our system strong, because it's also the time when we are the most vulnerable to viruses and bacteria and psychic vampirism, etc. So there's a whole science around this. If you, I'm so very, very lucky that my physician is actually a man named Dr. Zach Bush, who not many years ago was just a really amazing doctor here in Charlottesville, and now he's become sort of no surprise to me, quite famous in the world. And he did a podcast recently with Mark, what's his last name? Well, anyway, I'll get you guys the link to it. But he did a whole podcast on coronavirus, and it's just so amazing to hear the way that Ayurvedic traditional medicine and this scientific understanding of our environment really line up. And what was said was that his prediction is the reason that we have so much higher rates of flu is really related to the amount of pollution in the air and the way these viruses actually travel along these particulates in the air. And what you do see are really higher levels of influenza and many forms of coronavirus when you have this high level of pollution. And so those of you living in cities, that's why we're seeing cities having these, not only because you guys live close to one another, but you also have higher levels of pollution. And it's just like, you can really track this. And we have less amounts of that during the summer and spring. We see that spike in the third week of November. We see the spike because that's when the soil is not absorbing all of this carbon particulate matter. The soil starts to become cold and hard and dry, right? And now, of course, I'm butchering the science, so we'll get you the link and you guys can go listen to it. But the premise is this. Everybody's like, what is the podcast? I'll find it for you guys after our first lecture. But you must listen to it because it's just such an incredible framing on it. But the point of all this is the most vulnerable time. Literally the earth, we don't realize how much the sun and the earth are taking care of us until we start to have less light and the soil starts to get cold. And then it says, sorry guys, like I'm not going to do that absorption job for you anymore. And that is flu season. That is flu season. So that is why it is so important during this time that we really practice Ayurvedic regime, really practice Ayurvedic self-care, because the energetics of cold, cool, dry, damp, what else? Vulnerability, wind. I mean, it's so apropos, right? That the wind is blowing as I give this lecture. It's rough, it's erratic, it's also subtle, clear, and more emotional, right? And the energetic of fear is the highest at this time, aka news media, go F yourself, because they're literally just every station, right? Left wing, right wing, it's all about fear, 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 fear. And that already is a time in the reality where things are peaking. And it looks like Sarah, thank you very much, she just nailed it. So now is when you have to really, guys, put Ayurveda into practice more than any other time from now until the end of November, or really the first weeks of November. Really important. So what does that look like? Well, you guys already know this stuff, but let's just really, really give some practicalities around it. Vata goes up, right? Air and ether go up. And remember, that's subtle and clear. So this is when you can get the most clarity about your life. Have you noticed? It's like there's a crispness in the air and there's a difference in the light. That translates to the body as well. So everything needs to be the opposite of that Vata quality of cold, vulnerable, changeable. You know, I was supposed to actually go be with my sweethearts, Ragaya and Pema, who run Blue Sage Ayurveda, which is an amazing Ayurvedic retreat center in Northern California. And I was like looking so forward to doing this. And then I was just like, yeah, no, I'm not getting on a plane. Like, I'm not going to get in a car. I'm not going to do anything hardcore right now because my Vata's been a little high. So what does the Vata love? The Vata loves regular routines, even if it's bad routines. It's better to have a bad routine than like a really good routine one day and then a really bad routine and then a completely different routine. And then I'm going to study with this teacher. No, just kidding that. Oh, I'm going to do this type of therapy. No, that. Oh, I'm going to put this type of oil on my body. No, I'm going to do that. Anybody? It's some of you bitches. I know it. I'm teasing. I use that word with love. It's because it is all of us, right? We need stability. That is what grounds all the vata. And this has nothing to do with you are a vata or not a vata by Prakriti. This has everything to do with just the reality that all of us live in and the season that we find ourselves in. So what is that daily rhythm that I can repeat day after day after day after day? And if you can choose a real one, then a really good one, then that's going to be, of course, much better than a really bad one. This is why it's so hard for people to get out of really crappy relationships. We can get easily stuck in bad routines because our system, and this is true of the central nervous system, will tend to keep us in a stable pattern, even if it's a bad pattern. So we're going to, of course, want to include really great ones. I'm going to mute everybody again. I can hear somebody typing. All right. So practically, everything needs to be warm and wet and spicy. It's just that simple. Regular routines, warm, wet, and spicy. In October and November, we do really well with khichdi with spice. We do really well with, I know you guys had Meredith that's teaching you about cleansing, and some of you are doing her cleanse, which is awesome. We want to do steamed vegetables because it is still cleansing, but it's wet, steamed veggies. We want to do hot porridge in the morning with spice. Now is the time when you maybe after you've done a little bit of a cleanse, whether it be a 24-hour Ayurveda cleanse or a 10-day cleanse, you can add in the things we all need during this time. This is the time when we would have more dairy, more nuts, more stews, more bone broths. I know most of you eat meat. This is the time for high protein, whatever source is your protein, whether that be beans or animal meat. This is the time for like spicy ciders and spicy teas and fat, a lot of fat right now, and eggs, things like that are going to do really well for you. Pumpkin, the root vegetables, sweet potatoes, avocados, all of those things that are heavier and grounding and warm. It is not the time to do anything raw or cold or frozen or crunchy. It's not the time for the broccoli and the cauliflower and the sprouts and the salads, which I know yoga girls love, right? But it's really not the time for that. Those things are all very drying and ungrounding. It's not really the time for a lot of like dry fruits and bars, like Lara bar, and no offense to Lara. But if you are going to do the smoothies, which I love the smoothies, and I get in so much trouble. I'm like the Ayurvedic, I remember before I started just like getting really good at blocking people on Facebook, I would get these messages from like white dudes in Marin County wearing like Indian head garb, and they would write me and they would be like, you are everything that's wrong with Ayurveda because you posted an Ayurvedic smoothie. It's just really... And this one guy said to me, the ancients, and I have to keep you guys entertained, right? But this shit is like real, right? And the ancient people would never have used a Vitamix. That sounds like a gun going off, an engine going off. And I just am cracking up, and I'm like, dude, seriously, you're going to A, speak for all ancient people, but B, like the people I know that like want to help serve people would have been like, holy shit, I just found this thing called a Vitamix. It's like the best thing that's ever happened to me. So like, that's my personal soapbox on that. So all that to say, nobody loves this frozen blueberry avocado protein powder smoothie more than this kid. But it is not happening right now, and I really miss them. But I will say, like, as soon as you start doing the warm porridge in the morning, you can really feel the way that grounds the being. And and I don't know if I've given this example to you guys before, but it's really like, what do you want to send your little kid out? Who, imagine that you have a little kid, or some of you do, and like, what do you want to put in their belly when they go out to stand in November and wait for the bus? Do you want like a frozen blueberry smoothie inside of your kid, or do you want like a hot bowl of oatmeal with spices? And everybody intuitively knows that they want the oatmeal. And so just really treating ourselves the way we would treat our child, or if you're like me, baby Jack, my nephew. No smoothies for you, baby Jack. Although, if he would eat a smoothie, I would give him that, because he's just like, can I have a cupcake for breakfast? And I'm like, yes, because I'm spoiling him. All right. What else is this the time for? And there's this beautiful Nordic concept you've probably heard of called hygge, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it exactly right. And if you just hashtag that on the Instagram, you'll just get all these luscious images of this. And that is, it's all about snuggling and warmth and candlelight and cuddles and little tiny lights and, getting a puppy and like sesame oil and just everything that really, creating. This is full permission to let your space start to take on, like the inner space, start to take on this really held, cozy, luscious environment. Good. I don't know how I did the pronunciation, but this is the time. And if you know more about this, please educate us. So what are the tastes, my dears? It's all about sweet, spicy, sour. We want things that we eat to be mushy. So that's why khichdi is a big winner, but you can make khichdi out of anything. You can do red beans and rice. You can do, khichdi is from mung beans in India, and there are a million reasons why we want to use mung beans when we're cleansing, but just in your everyday life, anything's one pot meals, Vata loves that, because the spices and the qualities of the food merge and fuse, and that's easier for Vata to digest, and it warms that inner environment. We want our food to be soft and oily and mushy and salty and spicy. So this is the time to just not be afraid of the ghee. A few more foods I left off of the list. Beets, okra, squash, garlic, onions, figs, dates, whole grains, high quality oils. And this is when you will start to bring in more of something like honey. Really good during this time, because honey is heating. We're going to get into medicine, and we're going to get in next week to medicine making. And so honey is one of the really good carriers for your herbs during this time particularly. So we want to increase our regular routine. If you haven't taken on a regular Abhyanga practice, now's the time. Be okay with slowing down. Also, the teachings recommend wearing colors that are reflective of the autumn, like brown and orange and yellows. It seems sort of silly, but layers are really important during this time. Putting on lots of layers of clothes, because like right now, as you can see, I'm wearing basically nothing because it's 84 degrees here today. But 2 days ago, it was quite chilly. Particularly the head and the ears are really vulnerable at this time. So as it starts to cool down, you're going to want to really make sure the head and ears stay warm. The feet also. This is a great time for steam and sauna. So yay. And warming essential oils. So things that are of the more spicy nature, gingers, your eucalyptus, cinnamon, etc. I'm sure you guys have your own that you love. And then another really important practice that we haven't talked about a lot is called Nasya and Karnapurna. Nasya, you may have heard, is not just neti pot, but actually placing several drops of warm or medicated oil in the nostrils. And helping keep these channels really lubricated. And then Karnapurna is the ears. And so you would, lean your head to one side and you put in a couple drops of the warmed oil, and then you just lay there for a while and watch like something funny, or, it's kind of hard to read a book, but you certainly could, or listen to a podcast and just spend a little time massaging the ear. And it can be, 10, 15 minutes, and massaging this whole line of fascia right here and pulling on the eardrum and just working it intuitively. But like doing that on each side is really great practice for this time of year. Even if you do it once a week or once a month even. So if you're coming to Body Church and you're in the Charlottesville area, or you're traveling in, as we had some girls do from Richmond, we're going to have a little different Body Church as we start to move out of the summer and into the fall. And so right now, the teachings say we want to avoid excessive loud music, aggressive movements. We want to lower the amount of drafts in our lives. No more fast cars and fast experiences and fast running. The movement practices, the exercises that we do, should be slower and more mellow during this time. And then as we move more into the deep winter, you can start to build, weightlifting is a really great thing to do in the winter, because we can really access that kapha. But right now, just really letting things be slow and mellow. So this is just a quickie on Ayurvedic, staying sane, staying healthy, and Ayurvedic fall routines.
फूटे फूल